Okay, good morning, everybody. I also wanted to record this, sorry, on my phone, just in case. Okay, so we're up to chapter 18, Perek Yud Het. To refresh our memories, we saw at the end of last chapter that there was a tug of war between Achitophel and Hushai, Abshalom's two advisors, about what to do with David. Achitophel suggested not giving David time to recruit his army and establish himself and to attack him while he was weak. Hushai, being David's mole on the inside, delayed Abshalom, told him, no, you got to get more people. He flattered him, and as a result, Abshalom took the advice of Hushai. He's in the process of amassing his army, but it's clear to Achitophel that this was a big mistake and that Abshalom's rebellion is going to fall. We saw, killed himself as a result of that. And basically, we're now at the point where we're gearing up for an epic battle between David's camp and Abshalom's camp, another unfortunate incident of civil war. And that's been a recurring theme amongst the Jewish people, time and again, fighting amongst each other. We saw it in Sefer Shoftim with the Pilegesh Begiva'ah story. We saw it at the beginning of Shemuel Bet with Avner and Yoav fighting each other. We've seen it in countless other examples in Shoftim when certain tribes didn't come to help others, so then they were attacked. So civil war has unfortunately been a theme in our history, and it never ends up well, but sometimes it's necessary, and here is one of those examples. So we're going to begin chapter 18, and essentially this chapter is going to discuss the death of Abshalom, and the next chapter is going to be David's reaction to the death of Abshalom. So let's begin. Chapter 18, verse 1, Perek Yud Het, Pasuk Aleph, page 761 in the Sachs Hebrew English Tanakh, if you're following with that. Vayifkod David et ha'am asher ito. David musters up his troops that were with him. Vayasem alehem sareh alafim v'sareh me'ot. And he sets over them captains of thousands and captains of hundreds. Now that's, already surprising to the reader, because the last time we read, how many people did David really have with him? We said like 600 people. All of a sudden, there's captains of thousands and captains of hundreds, and it seems as though David has this very, very, large army. Where did they come from? What happened? So the text doesn't really tell us, and we're going to see a few more statements later on that show David's army was quite large. So there's a few things that we could potentially speculate. What do you think? Yes. True. Good. So we did see at the end of last chapter that David was accepted by a number of people in the Transjordan. We saw he was accepted by Bnei Ammon and Machir ben Amiyam Devar and Barzilai HaGiladi. So David did find some friends in some far-off places. And so it's very possible that they had, muscle and manpower that came and joined David. Another possibility, those Shvatim on that side may have pledged more allegiance to David over Abshalom, and so maybe David found some relief in them. Other possibilities could be that when people saw Abshalom and what he did with the concubines of David and such a terrible act, people started to shy away from Abshalom. So it's possible that people moved over to the camp of David. And I think someone suggested in last class, or asked in last class, did Achitophel's suicide ring any bells or alarms for people? And that's also very possible. When people saw what Achitophel did in the aftermath of Abshalom choosing Hushai's advice over his own, that kind of sent a strong signal to people, this rebellion is going sideways, and that may have also pushed people to the camp of David. So it doesn't say explicitly, but we could speculate as to a whole host of reasons why David is, as we said, his stock is on the rise, people are coming to him, and that's where David has Sareh Alafim, the Sareh Me'ot. And in a moment, we're going to see that David all of a sudden becomes so confident that he's going to win. It's almost inevitable to David that he's going to win. He's not concerned at all in this battle of the potential for losing. The only thing he's going to be concerned about in the battle is what will happen to his son Abshalom, right? He's only nervous about whether he's going to die. But David has taken it as a foregone conclusion that he's going to win this fight. We haven't seen that yet. He always feels like he'll be under the gun until God tells him so, right? And maybe at the end of it, later on down the road, I'll share with you a Gemara. There's a Gemara that says that when Shlomo built the Bet HaMikdash, the doors of the Bet HaMikdash would not let him in until he prayed some of the Psalms of David, and he was let in. And the Gemara says it was at that moment that Shlomo was granted access into the Bet HaMikdash that he realized they had forgiven David. David had been forgiven for his sin. Because Shlomo invoked the word of David to gain access. He realized that the zechut, the merit of David, had now become so great to allow him to enter the Bet HaMikdash. So it seems like there's some things more to be done later on down the road. Exactly when? That was his rule in Yerushalayim. 7 in Hebron and 33 in Yerushalayim. Doesn't say exactly at what point, but I think we speculated that most of these events are happening towards the middle end of his life, because it's all going to carry him towards the end, and it's sort of happening in that time frame. I think we don't have an exact clue. It doesn't say Bishnat X, whatever it might be. Not. Well, it definitely has to be somebody who's capable of doing such an act and somebody who would have a desire for such a thing. At the same time, it does seem like the aftermath does happen in pretty rapid succession towards the end of his life. Not exactly. But we also speculated that this would have to be a rebellion that happened at a time that made sense that David would pass the Melucha to Abshalom, which means it's probably in the last several years before he was ready to pass away. Verse 2, Vaishalach David et ha'am hashlishit biyad Yoav. David sent out 1/3 of his troops under the command of Yoav, his trusted general. V'hashlishit biyad Avishai ben Tzeruya achi Yoav. Another 1/3 of his army he put under the leadership of Avishai, son of Tzeruya, the brother of Yoav. V'hashlishit biyad Itai Hagiti. And the last 1/3 he put under the auspices of Itai Hagiti, who was his 3rd leading general. The fact that David can divide his army into 3 different groups shows you the size of it, and that's usually a sign of major strength. When you could divide and conquer, that's a big deal. And in a surprise turn, the king says to the people, I too want to accompany you into battle. So one thing is you'll notice a little break in the middle of the pasuk there, like a little gap. It's almost like David prepared, and then after he realized, hey, I don't want to make the same mistake I made once in the past, not going out to war with my people. We saw that was what kind of led David to the whole Bathsheba situation. And this is his punishment. So now David is saying, I don't want to be guilty of that again. He says, I want to go out to war with you. There may be another reason why David would also want to go out to war against his son Abshalom. Why do you think that he might also want to? 100%, exactly why. He wants to make sure that Abshalom is dealt with the way he wants him to be dealt with. And so David is there also because he wants to ensure Abshalom's safety. To that end, the nation reject his proposal. They don't want David to come out with them. So at least the people here grant him permission not to come, and in fact, push him not to come. But verse 3, Vayomer ha'am lo tetzeh. The people say, no, you will not go out with us. Ki im nos nanus, for if we in fact need to retreat, lo yasimu elenu lev. They won't care. They won't pay attention to us. They won't chase us. And even if half of us die, lo yasimu elenu lev. The enemy will not care that they have killed half of us. Ki ata chamonu asara alafim. For you are like us, equivalent to 10,000 people. Ve'ata tov ki tiyeh lanu me'ir la'azor. And now it is better for us, it will be good for us if you could stay in the city and help us from the city. So the nation makes a few claims. They say, we don't want you to come to battle with us. How come? Basically, where you're the prize. What does the enemy want? They just want you. Remember, Achitophel's idea was, I'm going to chase and we're just going to kill David and we'll bring the men back, right? The Mered, the rebellion of Abshalom, needs only to kill David, and that's how it will rise up. So the people with David say, hey, we're fighting this battle for you, but we're really not important. If we retreat, they won't chase us. If we die, they'll care, they won't care. They're after you. So for you to go to war against them, is to put our most valuable asset in the line of fire. We don't want to do that, right? He says, Ki ata kamonu asara alafim. They say you're equivalent to 10,000 of us. By the way, if you take their comments literally, they say if they kill half of us, right, and you're equivalent to 10,000, that means how many soldiers did David have? Potentially he had 20,000 soldiers, because they're saying if half of us die, 10,000, you're equivalent to us 10,000 people who would die. So it's possible David has 20,000 soldiers fighting in this war, and keep that number 20,000 in mind, because the death toll we will see later will be 20,000 people. It's interesting how it all comes back. So they say, don't, David, stay back in the city. You can help us from the city. What could David do from the city? Maybe he can strategize or send more men, or, I don't know, do whatever he needs to do. But really, they're just trying to convince him, stay behind, you're not needed.
Maybe that's, it's noted here because he said they wanted to keep it back.
Right.
That's just further.
Meaning that when David offered, he wasn't necessarily offering to be in the head, he was offering to be with them, but even that they didn't want. Yeah, that's possible. Even David recognizes that maybe he doesn't want to necessarily be at the forefront. It's not so much I want to lead you out into war for courageous purposes. It's really more, I just want to be around what's going on, right? And I want to watch what's taking place. You can see David's motivation in that. Okay. David, however, has to accept his men's proposal. Verse 4, Vayomer alehem hamelech, the king says to them, Asher yitav be'enechem e'eseh, whatever is good in your eyes, I will follow. Vayamod hamelech el yad hasha'ar, the king waits by the gate, v'chol ha'am yatzu leme'ot ve'la'alafim, and the rest of the people exit by the hundreds and by the thousands. What do you make of the fact that David is standing by the gate as the people are leaving? What imagery does that invoke for you, if any? Right, so it's like a captain who's waiting them out, but even though David realizes he's going to take a back seat in this war, he's not lounging in the palace like he once was. He's not hanging out in some remote area. He's standing there at the gate, giving chizuk and strength and support to his people as they're ready to leave. Who else once stood by the gate and gave support and strength to the people? Abshalom. In the beginning of the rebellion, how did Abshalom get popular? Because Abshalom waited by the gate, and when he saw people, he said to them, what are you coming for? What are you doing? Oh, you sound right. Oh, I'm going to help you. There's nobody else who can help you but me. So David is taking a page out of his son's book, Abshalom, and saying, even though Abshalom is wrong for what he's doing, he highlighted a weakness of mine. What was my weakness? I wasn't being enough of a together with the people. So David takes a page out of Abshalom and learns from his son Abshalom to be involved with the people, to wait by the gate, to give them strength, to be front and center in creating relationships with his nation, right? That's, again, a show of greatness from David. Even when someone is doing something wrong, he manages to learn the good thing from them and take out a positive lesson on how to improve himself. And that's a good lesson for us. Sometimes we encounter people who aren't doing the right thing when you look from a bird's eye view, but certain aspects of what they're doing do make sense, and what they're doing is right. You want to learn to cherry pick those good things from them and reject the bad things, kind of like a filter or like a sifter of flour. You want to take the good and leave out the bad. And David is a very good person at doing that.
And I think that's maybe why he's always had a soft spot, because he learned from him all along.
True.
From when
Yeah.
he's the one who avenged his sister, and no one else did. I think he
Yeah.
always looks at him and maybe I don't have the courage to do the things.
100%. And this goes back to what I spoke about on Shabbat. When a person experiences adversity, they always try to find a way to use it as a growth process, as a way to say to themselves, even though what that person is doing is wrong, it must be happening to me for some kind of a reason. It must be something that I'm being challenged here, that I need to figure out what I need to learn and what I need to experience in terms of growth over here. And David is very good at doing that. Verse 5, David here, however, gives an interesting command to his generals. And here we're going to see some tension between David and his people. The king takes his three generals to the side, Yoav, Avishai, and Ittai, and he says to them, Le'at li lana'ar Abshalom. Deal gently with the lad Abshalom. V'chol ha'am sham'u betzavot ha'melech et kol hasarim al devar Abshalom. All the troops heard the king give the order about Abshalom to all the officers. So even though David directed his words towards the three generals, word spread and they had heard what David wanted. Look at David's language very carefully. He says, Le'atli, deal gently, like le'at, slowly, calmly, deal gently, lana'ar Abshalom. What do you make of that, right? To the na'ar, to the young lad, what does na'ar invoke for you? Young, innocent, naive, immature, it's not his fault, right? Exactly. So David looks at his son Abshalom as someone who's a na'ar, someone who got caught up in a bad situation and is immature. And so it's not his fault. We shouldn't deal so harshly with him, give him the benefit of the doubt. That's David's perspective on Abshalom. And you could understand that coming from a father to his son. But again, despite Abshalom's really heinous behavior, right? Sleeping with his father's concubines, he's done a lot. He hasn't been such an innocent person, if we're really being brutally honest. He's been somebody who has acted with a lot of gall and a lot of arrogance, right? And yet David still continues to treat him this way. And the people, his officers, and many of the troops have a hard time with this with David. They don't see what David sees. They don't view it that way. And they're frustrated by the fact that David is giving such an impression of his son, and they're the ones who have to go now to fight and to be in this very brutal war. And now we have to treat Abshalom like he's a little a teenager, right? They're going to have a hard time. And this tension is going to run throughout the chapter. So keep it in mind. No, not at all. Not at all. The question is what David is feeling appropriate? That's the right question, right? Huh? So a parent to a child, yes. We cannot judge David for that. You could argue that almost any parent would feel that way for their child. But given the behavior of Abshalom, many people feel as though David, there's some criticism here about David and the way he's treating Abshalom, and he should be more aggressive and more forthcoming. What do you think?
I think this is just another known example of David's weakness, is that he very often gets into trouble when he looks at his personal goals instead of what's best for the Malchut.
Yes, 100%. And that's why people are starting to get people are going to get frustrated with him, and the question will be, will they follow David's orders or not? And that's going to be a big issue in this chapter. Yeah. Of course.
Maybe he really wants to deal with him in his own way. He doesn't want anybody else. Because he was directed at him, let him deal with it.
So maybe it's like one of those things. I don't want him back dead. I want him alive because I want to deal with him. I want to be the one to put it in. Yeah, it's possible. But we've seen But the words seem to invoke a sense of softness, forgiveness for Abshalom. People have a hard time with that. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. Right. Well, he wants them to look at it that way as well. Right. Right. Then they'll just kill him. Right. Yeah, exactly. Also, David knows, as we will soon see, that just like his own men said to him that this is about him, that if David gets killed, it's over. David also knows that it's the reverse as well. That should they kill Abshalom, it'll end as well. In other words, this is even though there's armies going at each other, this is essentially between David and Abshalom. It's between two people. Should David die on one side, the war will end. Should Abshalom die on the other side, the war will end. Because it's really just about David and Abshalom. And that's in fact what's going to happen. So David knows that the people are going to have a major desire to kill Abshalom, because the moment they kill Abshalom is the moment that it'll all end. And to Julie's point, that's where there's a little bit of the tinge of David's selfishness, because David is saying, don't kill Abshalom, which basically means the longer they don't kill Abshalom, the longer what? The longer other people will die, the longer the battle will rage on. And so you can understand the frustration of the other soldiers to say, no, we don't want to leave Abshalom. The longer Abshalom stays alive, the longer this goes on. The more people are die, the more life is lost. So no, we don't want to do this. So David again is putting his own personal issue between him and Abshalom ahead of the needs of the people who are going to fight with each other, and the death toll is going to be pretty large. Yeah. Shemuel, not so much for Shaul, right? He goes hard at Shaul afterwards. We're going to try to compare David to another person who had a soft spot for his son. Yeah, so I'll hold on to it. By the end, we're going to try to compare David to one other character, and that will show the criticism of David on this point. Yeah. And when it press forward, it'll become more obvious. Verse 6, the troops marched out into the open to confront the other Israelites, and the war takes place in the forests of Ephraim. Okay, we'll see what you think. Hold on to it. Now, the fact that the battle takes place in the forest is going to be a major advantage for David, because let's remember, as Achitophel described David, David's men are warriors. They are trained soldiers. They know how to fight. Remember, Hushai's advice to Abshalom was, find the soldiers from Dan to Be'er Sheva, which means that Abshalom is amassing a large army, but a very untrained, not skillful army. So to battle in the forest gives who the advantage? Gives David and the skilled warriors and the smaller army the advantage. Because if you know the terrain and you have good military strategy, the forest will give them the advantage. And that's exactly what happens. In verse 7, Vayinagefu Sham Am Yisrael. The nation of Israel, that's the nation of Abshalom, takes a heavy toll. Lifnei Avdei David, before the servants and warriors of David. Vatihisham HaMagefa Gedola Bayom Hahu. The plague and the death toll was very, very large on that day. Esrim Aleph, 20,000 people. You could assume most of those from the camp of Abshalom fall by the sword in that day. Verse 8, Vatihisham HaMilchama Nafotzet Al Penei Chol Haaretz. The battle spread out all over the region. Vayarev Haya'ar Le'echol Ba'am, and the forest devoured more troops me'asher achla ha'cherev bayom hahu than the sword actually did on that day. What do you think that means? Could be a whole host of terrain issues, not prepared at all. It could also mean that the reason for the deaths of many of these soldiers was because of the forest, not so much because of, in the end of the day, other people killed them, but it was because they were disoriented. They didn't know how to fight among the forest, more so than just hand-to-hand combat. And what that indicates here, why that's important, is that the forest is like the reason of who? Exactly, right? In other words, the people here that are dying because Hashem is saying so, right? God is the one who's playing his role behind the scenes through the forest, through nature, to squash the rebellion of Abshalom. So of course, David's troops are fighting, but in the end of the day, God's hand is felt in the battle in the way that the forest is devouring the troops of Abshalom.
run to the forest and keep saying that.
And hiding,
they
yeah.
were cold and they were eating that. And maybe that gave them more of an opportunity to get familiar with the forest, being chased there.
That's definitely possible. So that played the advantage card for David. So the thing that was his weakness actually turned into his strength, for sure. And we're going to see actually that now Abshalom is going to become a product of God killing him rather than people. And you'll see how. Verse 9, Vayikare Abshalom lifne avde David. Abshalom encountered some of David's followers. The Abshalom rochev al hapered. Abshalom is riding on his mule. Vayavo hapered tahad sovech ha'ela hagedola. And the mule rode past underneath a tangled branch. Vayutan ben hashamayim uben haaretz, and Abshalom vayehezak rosho ba'ela. His hair got caught in the branch, and he was placed between the heaven and the earth. V'hapered asher tahtav avar, and the mule that was underneath him rode past. Essentially, it's almost something out of a cartoon. Basically, he rides past the branch. His long hair, which we know was a major quality about him. Either he was a Nazir, but what we do know is that he used his hair as his beauty. That was his thing that everybody saw. He only cut it once a year when it got to be too heavy for him. But his hair was his claim to fame. And his hair gets caught in a branch and it swings him around, and he's now hanging upside down, and the mule keeps going without him, and he's now hanging upside down by a tree between the heaven and the earth. And he's stuck, right? It's a good question. We don't see that he has anybody else around him. It's possible that he was, fleeing. Again, the forest is disorienting. People abandon him. He seems to be alone. Yeah. And he's taking a death toll, right? So he's alone, and this is how he gets caught. Yeah, no secure, no muscle. Now the midah keneged midah over here is palpable. You can feel it, right? The very thing that was his claim to fame is the thing that's going to cause his death, right? And notice how the pasuk refers, it doesn't say vayechezak se'aro, doesn't say his hair, it says vayechezak rosho, his head. What does that mean? His arrogance, exactly. The very head that he wished to put the crown of the kingdom upon it because of his arrogance was the thing that now got caught in the branch and is basically, he's a sitting duck, right? And the mule passes and now he's stuck. Vayar ish ehad vayaged leYoav. A soldier, presumably from the side of David, sees Abshalom, and immediately he tells Yoav. Now he knows not to touch Abshalom because he heard the command of David, deal gently with Abshalom. So he doesn't do anything right away. He calls Yoav. Vayomer, he says to Yoav, Hine ra'iti et Abshalom talui ba'elah. I see Abshalom is hanging by an elah. Elah is a fancy tree. In English, they call it a terebinth. It's a very interesting type of tree, whatever, big tree. Vayomer Yoav la'ish hamagid lo. Yoav says to the man who informs him of Abshalom's whereabouts, he says, V'hine ra'ita. He says, you saw it. Umadua lo hikito sham arta. Why didn't you kill him? If you saw Abshalom hanging there, why didn't you kill him? You can tell the soldiers all want Abshalom to die. They know that's going to put the battle to an end. If you had killed him, I would have owed you 10 pieces of silver and a belt. What does that tell you? Bingo. Yoav had placed a prize for anybody who kills Abshalom. So look at how distant, look at the gap between David and Abshalom. David said, deal gently with my young lad, Abshalom, don't hurt him, bring him back to me, etc., etc. And Yoav is promising people a prize for anybody who will kill Abshalom. You could see how far apart David and Yoav are in the way they're approaching the situation. Yeah. Is behind, yeah. Well, that's exactly what he's going to do. That's exactly what he's going to do. Exactly. So Yoav is going to get very crafty, and he's going to still fulfill that. He's been crafty. He knows how to deal with these situations. He needs to find a way. We've seen he did this with Uriah HaChiti. How do I kill Uriah following David while at the same time not harming my men? Yoav's number one priority is very clear. He's a general. Who's his number one priority? No, his soldiers. Yoav's soldiers are his number one priority. That's what he cares about. So he might know what exactly is David really needs, and he might have his own visions of how David should be behaving, but he needs to figure out a way, how do I protect myself and my troops while still somehow fulfilling the word of David, especially when he disagrees with the word of David. And Yoav is very good at playing around with things to try to find a middle ground, because he knows I need to end this war, which means I need to kill Abshalom, because I'm not putting my soldiers in the line of fire just because David has a soft spot for his son who really deserves to die. Yoav's not prepared to do that, right? So Yoav immediately tells him, why didn't you kill him? I would have had to, I would have given you this prize. That's what he did. The prize definitely was created for that purpose. Now look at the response that his soldier gives back to him. Vayomer ha'ish el Yoav. The man says to Yoav, notice he's called an ish, like he's a brave guy. He says, Velu anochi shokel al kapai elef kesef. Even if I had 1,000 pieces of silver that I could weigh in my hands, lo eshlach yadi el ben hamelech. I refuse to send forth my hand at the son of the king. Ki be'oznenu tziva hamelech. In my ears, the king had commanded, Otcha, you, ve'et Avishai, ve'et Itai lemon. He commanded all three of you, Shimru mi bana'ar be'Abshalom. Make sure you watch over my son Abshalom for my sake. So the soldier says, what are you talking about? First of all, I don't understand why you gave a prize, but you could give me all the prizes you want. I am not going to override the king's decree. I heard it myself. I heard him say it to you. I can't really understand what you're doing. And so therefore he goes, I'm not prepared to touch the son of the king against the king's command. Yeah. Verse 13. He says, O asiti benafshi sheker. If I betrayed myself, v'chol davar lo yikahed min hamelech, and nothing is hidden from the king, ve'ata tityatev mineged, and you would have stood aloof. Not only that, he says, I know what would have happened here. The soldiers also know Yoav. They said, I know what would have happened. I would have killed Abshalom, and who would have got? Yeah, I was going to take the brunt of it. When the king finds out about it, and he says, hey, who killed my son Abshalom without my permission? You, Yoav, are not going to stand up for me at that moment. You're not going to say, oh, I told him to do it, I gave a prize. You're going to say, it was him, he did it, and I know what happens to that person. He's going to end up bearing the brunt of it. So this young man is very smart. First of all, he says, I pledge loyalty to the king. I refuse to go against the king. And even if I was prepared to go against the king because I thought you would protect me, I don't have that much trust in you. I know you're going to leave me, or you're going to throw me under the bus, as they like to say, right? And by the way, I think Yoav knew that's exactly what was going to happen, right? Yoav was planning that from the very beginning. So he's probably upset that he got called out for what was definitely true. So Yoav then answers him back, right? Yoav's got to go shift to plan B, right? Vayomer Yoav says to him, Lochen ochila lefanecha. He says, then I will not wait for you. I'm not afraid of anybody. I'm not going to wait for you. He took 3 darts in his hand, and he spears them into the heart of Abshalom. But Abshalom was still alive in the thick growth of the terebinth. So he found a way to stab him that he would die of his wounds, but at that moment, he's still not dead. But he found a way to injure him and basically kill him without actually killing him. Why not? Because he leaves the dirty work to his lads. Verse 15, Vayasobu asara ne'arim. 10 young lads surround Abshalom. Nos'eh kele Yoav. They're the arms bearers for Yoav. Vayaku et Abshalom vaynituhu. And they strike Abshalom and deliver the final blow. So Yoav did what? He could still stand in front of David and say, I didn't kill David. I didn't kill Abshalom. Wasn't me. Even though, Kamuvan, he was the one who initiated the aggression, and he probably would have died on his own. But the Ne'arim take care of it, and so now Yoav can stand upright before David and say, I didn't kill him. Clearly, he violated David's word, but he needed to do what he needed to do. And you see it right in the way in the next pasuk. Verse 16, Vayitka Yoav b'shofar. Yoav blows the shofar. What does the shofar signal? The end of the war. Victory is over. Vayashov ha'am mirdof acharei Yisrael. All his troops retreat from pushing against the other members of Am Yisrael. Ki hasach Yoav et ha'am. For Yoav held the troops in check. They all knew, listen to what Yoav had to do. This is not the first time Yoav blew the shofar to end the battle. We had it earlier in Shemuel Bet. Yoav was the one who blew the shofar after the play fight got out of hand between Avner and his people, and Yoav and his people. That's where Yoav's brother Amasa was killed by Avner, and there was fighting, and there was a lot of death, and eventually Avner called to him and said, Hajj, let's end it. And Yoav blew the shofar to end it. There, the ending was quite tragic. There, Yoav was on the bad side of things because Avner told him, this was your fault. You're the one who initiated. You were the aggressor over here. And so that's why this happened. So Yoav had to blow the shofar to end that battle, having been the loser in that battle. Here, Yoav blows the shofar, having been the victor in this battle, and the one that comes out looking a lot better because he ends the civil war that was initiated by Abshalom, not initiated by himself. Okay, this is the death of Abshalom. Troublesome on what fronts? Right. Yeah. Striking that they took matters into their own hands and they deliberately disobeyed while, whatever little fudging they tried to do. Yeah. But they clearly are looking at David as someone who's not thinking clearly. Yoav is saying David is not thinking clearly. He's jaded by the love for his son, and he's making emotional decisions that don't make sense for the people and don't make sense for us. And so we cannot follow those orders. We cannot, and put people's lives in danger because our leader is not thinking clearly. Hopefully he'll come to his senses when he hears the news of it, but this is what needs to happen. Yoav has always been that type of person. What's the first thing that we know about him? He's always been David's major general. He's always been David's general from the very beginning. I mean, he's done a lot of things. He was the one who fought against Avner at the beginning. Then he was the one who killed Uriah at the battlefield, put him at the front lines when he was fighting. Yoav is the one who destroyed the Pilishtim when David didn't go to war. Yoav's been an up and down character. In fact, we've said many times, Yoav is almost the foil to David. Every time David's doing the right thing, Yoav seems to be doing the wrong thing. Every time David's doing the wrong thing, Yoav seems to be the one doing the right thing. And to a certain degree in this situation, aside from the fact that Yoav disobeys the king, who did the right thing? As the reader, you're saying, Yoav did the right thing over here. Maybe it was wrong that he disobeyed the king, but in the end of the day, who did the right thing to end the civil war in the Jewish people? It was Yoav. Yoav is the foil to David. When David falters, Yoav is moral. When Yoav is immoral, David is the one who's calling him to the car. That's the relationship that they have, right? It's up and down. Yeah, balance for sure. Yoav killed Avner, sure. That was what got David into trouble. For Ishboshet. Correct. He was the one who was pushing up against David. Then he wanted to switch teams after the whole play. Yoav said, "What are you doing? He's a spy." And so Yoav took him in the side and killed him in a dark alley. And David said, "What'd you do?" Yeah. So sometimes when you try to protect the king in an extreme way, you make good decisions, and sometimes you make poor decisions. In that context, when Yoav killed Avner, that was a poor decision. David was the morally correct person in that situation. Avner was coming to help David. He was pledging allegiance to David. Yoav saw this as a potential threat to his own position as general. He wasn't happy with what Avner had done in the play fight. Avner killed his brother. And so in that situation, Yoav was the one who was making decisions based on his personal, emotional things, and David was the one who was looking at the bigger picture, right? So, I mean, if you want to say, and we can point at multiple different stories that we've read so far in Shemuel, Aleph, and Bet, the person who focuses on their personal issues, when you're a leader, whether you're Yoav or you're David, and you focus on your personal agenda, your own emotions, you let that get in the way of your leadership, you make poor decisions. When you look at the bigger picture and what's necessary for the people and what they need to do, you make better decisions. And that's just the nature of being a good leader. Correct, he did. Yeah. We saw that Shaul took it on the chin for sure, taking it easy on somebody who he wasn't supposed to. It's a hard, though, comparison between Agag, the king of Amalek, and Abshalom, David's own son. So that's why I'm going to try to give you a different character who is a little bit more connected to the idea that it's his own son. Okay? From here till the end of the chapter now, well, first of all, we're going to read about what they do with Abshalom and his body. And then from the end of the chapter, we have to figure out how they're going to tell David. That's going to be the next major challenge. How are they going to tell David, and how they're going to present this information to him. But verses 17 and 18 speak about the end of Abshalom. Verse 17, Vayikhu et Abshalom vayashlichu oto bayar el hapahat hagadol. They took Abshalom and they flung him into a large pit in the forest. Vayatzivu alav gal avanim gadol meod. And they piled upon him a large heap of stones. V'chol Yisrael nasu ish le'aholav. And then all the Israelites fled home. Right? So they basically dumped him in a pit. They chucked a bunch of stones on him and they ran. Right? They're not planning on doing that. This is a burial of sorts for Abshalom. We don't know, but you could imagine them thinking to themselves at that moment, maybe we should bring Abshalom dead back to his father. No, they bury him, but this is clearly an act of what? It's disgrace. They're disgracing him, no question. The soldiers are taking him. They're saying, we don't want him to get any type of glory, any formal burial. This is someone who rebelled against the king. He deserves nothing. And so they fling him into a pit. They heap a bunch of stones on him, which has happened in the past, by the way. Heaping stones on top of a dead body is a major sign of disrespect. That's what Yehoshua did to all of the kings that he conquered amongst the Canaanite nations. That's what he did to Achan, who stole from the spoils of Yericho, and because of him, 36 people of the Jewish people died. When they killed Achan, they just dumped stones on him and they left him there, right? So this is clearly a sign of what you do to somebody who deserves no good ending at the end of the day.
Three guards, and then they pounded on him. Then you can't say, oh, he decided battle. He was mangled.
Right. So maybe they didn't want to do that because they didn't want to bring any questions upon themselves. Definitely another angle as well. Probably a combination of all those different things. Right. Yeah, this could definitely be pushing him even a little further. We'll wait. We have to wait and see. And then we don't know who else is around. Yeah. Potentially. We'll have to wait and see what they tell David, what information they give to him, and how David reacts to it. So here we go. Before that, we have a very odd pasuk. In verse 18, it tells us something that is going to call an interesting question here. Abshalom lakach vayatzev lo bechayav et matzevet asher be'emek hamelech. Now, Abshalom, during his lifetime, Abshalom had already prepared for this. He already was ready for this. He had already prepared for himself a monument, a matzevet, a pillar that he had prepared be'emek hamelech. Ki amar, because he already told himself, almost understanding that his end is near. He said, "Enli ben, I have no child, I have no son. Ba'avur hizkir shemi, for my legacy to endure. Vayikra lematzevet al shemo. He therefore called this monument on his name. Vayikar ela yad Abshalom ad hayom hazeh. And he called it the monument of Abshalom to this day. To this day means to the time that this book was written, right? What does Abshalom do here? Abshalom realizes he's in very deep, but he's going forward. But at some point, he came to the realization, I have no children, I have no son. I'm probably going to die in this thing. I'm probably not going to have any legacy. I want to make sure that I'm remembered. He made for himself a monument to be put wherever he died. Fascinating, right? And they apparently found this monument, and they put it where they had buried him. And so that they called it Yad Abshalom. Now, what's so strange about this whole thing is, I'm not sure if you recall, But a couple of chapters ago, it told us that Abshalom had children, right? He had several children. He had sons, he had daughters. He called one of them Tamar after his sister, right? He had children, right? And so what's going on over here, right? It's telling us that he made a monument because he had no children, but it told us in chapter 14 that he did have children. So what's happening? Yeah.
Maybe, that if he died, that his rebellion was a failure, and to still that his grandchildren, the mother or the children may align themselves with David, may not honor their father, trying to keep himself safe or part of the royalty.
So he's nervous that his children will forget about him and they won't be a good consideration for him. Or erase him, so to speak. So what does Abshalom seek to accomplish with this monument? That even if his children are not remembering, I want to be remembered. I don't want to be erased, and I'm afraid my own children might erase me. It's a good midah keneged midah. Interesting. I like that approach. I haven't seen that one written, but it makes sense. Makes sense. Two other classic approaches that are taken by the rabbis is one, they say, in fact, he did have children, but he was always recognizing the fact that even if he became king, he knew his children were not worthy of becoming king. In other words, so even, and this tells you the extent of Abshalom's rebellion. Abshalom is rebelling against his father, knowing that even if he's successful, he knows his own children are not worthy to be passed on. So it's purely for him. It's not even necessarily for a legacy of his children. And that's why he wanted to make a matzeva, some kind of monument to honor him, because he knew his children would not take over his rule, and therefore he would not be honored in that fashion. That's one approach that the rabbis bring. He didn't, oh, you're saying why would they put this monument over there? I think they wanted to like chuck it, get rid of it or something like that. That it shouldn't be, it should be lost maybe, I guess. Yeah, maybe. Then there's, yeah, go ahead. Yes, that's the other approach that they take. Correct, right. So the two options are either he had no worthy son to take over for him, so that's why he wanted the monument, or at some point, as a punishment for what he had been doing to David, his children slowly were knocked off one by one. And yet, even that didn't alert him to the fact that he should drop his, in the end of the day, once you're in deep to something, it's very hard to pull yourself out, no matter how much you're suffering as a result of what's taking place. We go to verse 19. We're going to try to read from here to the end of the chapter relatively fast. The rest of the chapter is about how to inform David about what happened. Now, what we have here is a bit of a tension. Basically, to understand these next 10 or plus Pesukim, what we have tension is the people are trying to predict how David will react. Some people, like the one we're going to meet in the verse 19, Achimaatz, who's the son of Tzadok, he thinks David's going to be fine with it. He wants to run and tell David. He thinks this is good news about what took place, and he thinks David's going to handle it okay. Yoav knows David's not going to handle it okay. So watch the back and forth that they have with each other. Achimaatz ben Tzadok amar arutzana. Achimaatz, remember Achimaatz was one of those moles that David had on the inside. He was the one who was running back and forth. He's apparently a very fast runner and a very smart guy, and he's a good informer. So Achimaatz, the son of Tzadok, says, let me run. And let me tell the news to the king. He's very enthusiastic about it. Hishefato Adonai biyad oivav. For God has vindicated David against his enemies. This is going to be a great thing to go and tell the David. Or he didn't really understand what was going on exactly. Verse 20, Yoav says, hold your horses. Yoav tells him, Lo ish besora ata hayom hazeh. You are not the right person to go and tell David on this day. David needs someone else to come and tell him. He needs to be let down easily and gently. You're usually the bearer of good news. It's not you today. Ubisarta beyom ahed. You're for news for another day. You have to hold back. Today you will not inform the king of what took place. For the king's son is dead. And that's what he cares about. So you could see Yoav and Achimaatz are going back and forth. What is the key information that we're going to tell David? What is David going to focus on? Achimaatz thinks he's going to focus on the fact that his enemy is dead and the rebellion is done and he won and he can go back to being the king again. Wow, unbelievable. That's what he thinks David's going to focus on. Yoav knows what's he going to focus on. He's going to focus on my son is dead. Because in David's mind, he already knew he was going to win. Remember earlier, David didn't care about what was taking place in the battle. He separated his people. He knew they were going to win. What was his last words? His major concern was take care of my son. So Yoav sends somebody else. Verse 21, Vayomed Yoav la Kushi. Yoav tells a Kushite man, Lech haged lamelech asher ra'ita. Go and tell the king what you have seen. Vayishtachu Kushi Yoav vayarotz. The Kushi bows before Yoav and he gets on his way. So now he's running. And Achimaatz is not happy about this. Verse 22, Vayosef od Achimaatz ben Tzadok vayomer ad Yoav. Achimaatz, the son of Tzadok, pushes against Yoav. He's insistent. He says, Vihima, no matter what, arutzana gam ani. Let me run also acharei Kushi. I want to also go and tell the king. Vayomer Yoav. Yoav says to him, Lama ze ataratz beni. Why are you trying to run to tell the king? Ulcha en besora motzet. You have no news worth telling. Yoav knows that what's Achimaatz going to tell him about the victory, and he tells him, you're going to tell him about the victory. He doesn't care. He's going to focus on Abshalom. You are not seeing the situation. Achimaatz is saying, no, let me go. They're debating about how to portray this to David. I don't think he's the guy who they're gonna suspect did this wrong. I don't think he's worried about that. He's an informer. He's a tech guy. He's not the guy who did it. David's not gonna. That could be something else. Maybe he wants to tell the truth about the death of Abshalom, but you see, it's going to be a little different. Watch how the events unfold. Finally, Yoav cannot contain Achimaatz. Achimaatz says back again a third time in verse 23. Vihi ma'arutz. He says, I'm going to run anyway. Yoav tells him, okay, vayomelo rutz. Like a parent, after your kid asks you the third time, can I do it? You're like, all right, just go. By this point, apparently this maybe took some time. Yoav is hopeful that the Kushi has enough of a head start that the Kushi will get to David before Achimaatz. So he doesn't care. He tells him, fine, go. The Kushi is going to tell him in a certain way about the death of Abshalom. And the Kushi is gonna basically try to smooth it out or whatever it is. But he's not coming. When the Kushi is on his way and David sees him from a distance, which is what's going to happen, David's already going to know. If David sees the Kushi, he's going to know something bad happened. If he sees Achimaatz, who's been his number one guy, he's going to think something good happened. And then he's going to be even more of a panic, right? So Yoav at this point is hopeful the Kushi has enough of a head start to beat Achimaatz there. But Achimaatz, despite maybe not being as fast a runner as the Kushi, is smarter. He takes a different path. He says, Vayarotz Achimaatz derech hakikar vaya'avor et hakushi. Achimaatz runs by the way of the plains and he passes the Kushi. So he doesn't take as straight a path, but he takes an easier terrain. He goes around the mountains, goes through the plains, which is a longer path, but a more flat path, a less difficult path, and therefore he vaya'avor. He passes the Kushi, and Achimaatz is ahead now. Yeah. Oh, that he killed the messenger? But Kushi is not going to say, I killed him. That's kind of like what Esther was saying. Yeah, maybe part of Yoav is also not just for the king, but also a protection against Achimaatz, and he doesn't mind the Kushi going and telling him. That could be another layer to it as well. Verse 24, V'David Yoshev ben Shnei HaSha'arim. David was sitting between the two gates, which gives you the impression that David is what? He's anxious. He's ready to hear something, right? Like he's not at home, but he's not outside the gate because he's got to stay in the city because that's what people told him to do. But he's waiting. He's very anxious. He sends up a watchman who goes all the way up to the gate at the top of the tower. And he lifts his eyes and he sees he sees a single man running. Who's that single man? We know it's Achimaatz, right? But he can't make it out right away. The seer tells the king, and he tells the king what he sees, that there's a single guy running. If he's running by himself, he has good news, he has news to go ahead and tell us. And he continues to come closer and closer. Then the seer says, there's somebody behind him who's also running to tell us. And the seer tells the guy at the gate, I see another person running alone. He says that one is also bringing news. Now at this point, you got to be a little bit weary, right? But David is trying to keep his hopes up, right? David's trying to keep his hopes for some good news. At first, when he saw only one, he said, we're going to get some news. Then he says, oh, this guy also has news, but maybe it's not so bad. Verse 27, Vayomer HaTzofeh, the Tzofeh says, Ani ro'eh et merutzat harishon, I can see the way the first guy is running, kimrutzat Achimaatz ben Sadok, that it happens to be Achimaatz. He's already seeing this from a distance. Vayomer HaMelech, the king says, Ish tov zeh, oh, he's a good guy. Ve'el besorat tova yavo, he's probably bringing us good news, right? And you could see that the king is very hopeful. Maybe he's convincing himself, but he's very hopeful. Even though probably with the two people running, he should be more suspicious. Shalom. Achimaatz reaches the king, and he tells the king, Shalom, peace be on you. He prostrates himself upon la'apav arza on the ground, and now there's like a little break in the parasha. Vayomer, and he says to the king, Baruch Adonai Elohecha asher sigar et ha'anashim. He says, praise be the Lord your God who has delivered up the men, asher nasu et yadam badoni hamelech, who raised their hand against my lord the king. He tells him, we won the war, right? Praise is that who has delivered up the men who raised his hands. Now notice Achimaatz says, asher sigar et ha'anashim. He's captured or delivered up the people. What does that language portray? We're bringing them back. It doesn't say that we killed them. It doesn't say we destroyed them. It says we've delivered them. So he's giving David language that could potentially mislead him to thinking that the people are alive, right? He wants to see what's David's reaction on this issue, right? What happens? Vayomer HaMelech, the king says to him, Shalom lana'ar Abshalom. Is there peace upon the lad Abshalom? And when Achimaatz hears those words come out of his mouth, he immediately realizes what? I made a big boo-boo, right? Yoav was right. David has no reaction, no excitement, no nothing. His first question is, what about Abshalom? And this question, and not only that, he says again, Na'ar Abshalom. So Achimaatz realizes how David's looking at this. And when he hears that, Achimaatz gets flustered. And he gets so flustered that the next sentence out of his mouth is totally incomprehensible. He doesn't make any sense. Vayomer Achimaatz says, Ra'iti hamon hagadol. I saw a very large crowd of people. Lishloach et eved hamelech Yoav et avdecha. I saw a very large crowd when your majesty's servant Yoav was sending your servant off. Velo yadati ma, but I don't know what it was about. What the heck is he talking about? No. Exactly. But Achimaatz realizes at this point, he can't say what he came to say, right? Because David is not going to take that news well. So he's like, I don't know. I saw a large crowd of people. Yoav told me to come, and I don't really know what I'm supposed to say. So basically, he lost his mind, right? And he becomes totally flustered. So the king tells him, Vayomer HaMelech, sov hityatzevko. Step aside. Stand over there. I know there's someone else coming. Vayisov vayamod, and he steps aside. Verse 31, Vahine Kushiba. And now the Kushi comes. Vayomer HaKushi yitbaser Adoni HaMelech. He tells him, let my lord the king be informed. Ki shefatcha Adonai hayom miyad kol hakamim alecha. The Lord has vindicated you today against all who have rebelled against you. He's much clearer. He says the words that Achimaatz said originally that he wanted to say, which is, you've been vindicated, which means what? We've killed them. We've destroyed them. In a last-ditch possibility, because he didn't say Abshalom is dead, Vayomer HaMelech el HaKushi, the Melech says to the Kushi, Hashalom lanar Abshalom, is there peace upon my young lad Abshalom? Vayomer HaKushi, the Kushi says, Yu chanar oyve Adoni HaMelech, v'kol asher kamu alecha lera'ah. May the enemies of my Lord the king and all who rose against you to do you harm fare like that young man. In other words, what does he say then? They're all done, right? Now, next, and he goes right at it, right? And he basically tells them what we think. The next chapter is going to be David's reaction to this. You could say that he's probably not going to take it very well. But to just finish off that point, to whom is this being compared? David, in my opinion, is very similar. You want to take a stab at it? Or who were you thinking originally? Okay. So I'm going to think a little bit closer to us. I'm going to say Eli HaKohen. Yeah? Go back to the beginning of the book of Shemuel when the Jews were in a war with the Pelishtim, and Eli, just like David, is sitting on his chair waiting to hear what's going to happen. But who does he care about? He cares about the Aron. He cares about the Aron HaKodesh. And in that battle, his two sons die also. He doesn't care about his two sons. His priorities are wrong. He doesn't care about his two sons. He doesn't care about the rest of the people. When he hears the Aron is confiscated, he falls back on his chair and he dies, right? Yeah, exactly. This is going all the way back to the beginning when he's the king, when he's the Kohen Gadol. A very similar parallel. Just like David is waiting to hear the news, Eli is waiting to hear the news. Their priorities are not in line with the way the Navi wants them to be. And when they hear the news and they're waiting to hear the news that they want to really hear about, and the informer is telling them other news that they don't really want to know, and they're waiting, and then I'll get to the part that I want. And when they find out the news that they really want to hear about, it's bad. It's bad for them, and the reaction is going to be bad. But because the Navi is portraying David and Eli together, what does it say about David? It's criticizing him, because it's very obvious that the Navi was doing that to Eli. It was saying, Eli, your priorities were misplaced. It's saying, David, you too are having these priorities misplaced, and you too are struggling to understand the ramifications of this event. You should be, happier or more understanding of what the implications are for the Jewish people as a whole, not just for you yourself as an Abshalom. And so that's going to be where we're going to go into the next chapter in 19 to see David's reaction, how the people handle it with him, what ends up happening over here. But clearly the Navi is not happy with the way David is having the soft spot for Abshalom, the way he's treating him, the things that he said. He put himself first before the people. And as a result, we're going to see how this bears upon David in the next chapter, as we basically put a bow on Mered Abshalom, on Abshalom's rebellion, and what it means for David and the remainder of his kingdom. Questions? Okay, beautiful. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen. We continue next week.